Why was the rain always colder in Caracas? That night it fell in sheets, hammering against fractured rooftops, drumming on helmets, sliding down rifles until metal tasted like rust in the mouth. The streets shone like rivers of glass, reflecting bursts of fire that cut across the darkness. Gunfire wasn't chaos to her anymore. Jane Harper had learned to hear the patterns, to separate random violence from orchestrated betrayal. Tonight, this wasn't random. 50 meters ahead, one of her team screamed over comms. The sound clipped, cut short, and then drowned by static. Jane pressed her back against a crumbling wall, heart pounding but breath steady. 7 years of special operations had trained her for this rhythm of survival. Inhale, exhale, calculate. But no training could dull the sting of realization. Delta position had been compromised. Betrayal had a sound, and it was in her ear right now. She peeked over the wall, rain stinging her eyes. To her left, Santos, Kingfisher 2, was pinned down behind an overturned market stall, returning fire with her sidearm. Santos was the linguist, the one who could tell accents apart by half a syllable, the one who always smiled nervously before missions and whispered that she wasn't a soldier, not really. But tonight she fought like one. To Jane's right, the weapons expert was ghosting shadows, his suppressed bursts cutting precision through the ambush. And behind was methodically firing from cover, steady, surgical, unflinching. Her team, her hand-picked family, and every instinct told her someone had sold them out. "Shadow protocol," Jane said into her throat mic. Her voice never trembled. It wasn't military standard. It wasn't in any manual. She had created it herself, a last resort plan for when betrayal came from within. If the government they bled for ever turned its hand against them, they would disappear. They would die officially. They would live only as shadows. The rain thickened. Smoke grenades bloomed white across the street, buying seconds of cover. Jane chambered around into her SIG P-226. Her lips barely moved. 3, 2, 1, execute. They moved as one body, sprinting, covering, leaping through fire and thunder. A family forged in battle, obeying trust instead of orders. For a moment, she almost believed they would make it. Was the first to fall. A single shot, too clean, too precise. A sniper. His body slammed back against the wet stone, eyes wide with the shock of a man who knew instantly that he wouldn't get up again. Then the fireball came. An explosion ripped through the building near Santos. Concrete shattered, flames hurled her like a doll into a wall. The sound of her body breaking was louder than the blast in Jane's ears. His breath caught over comms, then cut out with the flat finality of bullets. Claire Winters, their medic, broke cover, screaming his name, rushing to save him. 3 rounds met her chest. Her legs folded beneath her like strings cut from a marionette. She hit the ground, still reaching for her fallen friend. Jane didn't scream. She didn't have the luxury. She had seconds left. Her window for survival was closing. Her father's face flickered unbidden into her mind. Deputy Director Thomas Reed of the CIA. The only man with clearance high enough to know their exact position, their protocols, their extraction routes. The only man she had trusted absolutely, once. He had sent them here, and now her team was dying in puddles of their own blood. Jane triggered the last phase of Shadow Protocol. She vanished into the storm drains beneath Caracas, dragging breath into her lungs, fighting the roar in her head. The strike team above confirmed kills one by one, voices filtered through the echoes of concrete. Commander Jane Harper died that night. At least, that's what the official record would say. 7 years later, Montana snow drifted gently against the windows of the Whistling Pines bar. Inside, the air smelled of pinewood smoke and whiskey. The neon sign buzzed like an old friend, flickering with the rhythm of a heart that refused to die. Jane wiped down a glass with quiet precision, her dark hair streaked silver, her face ordinary enough to fade into the background. That's how she liked it, invisible. No one saw how she positioned herself behind the oak counter, always with it to both doors. No one noticed the cig tucked beneath the bar, polished and loaded. No one questioned why her hands never stopped moving, pouring, wiping, arranging with the exact efficiency of someone who had lived their life counting bullets in seconds. To them, she was just Jane, the bartender. To herself, she was a ghost who had once commanded shadows. The town moved around her in its rhythms. Franklin, the mayor, telling the same fishing story for the fifth time that week, gesturing with hands that had once built combat bridges in the Army Corps of Engineers. Two loggers arguing about hockey, slamming fists into wood, but never at each other. Bishop, 75, back straight as a ruler, sipping her gin and tonic with the eyes of a woman who had seen battlefield medicine in places she never spoke of. They were all hiding something. Every veteran hides pieces of themselves. And then there was Samuel Iron Sam, retired colonel, calloused hands gripping his bourbon glass like it was the last warm thing in the world. He fiddled with his Cold War-era radio, always tuned to news broadcasts from Europe, as if the past was still whispering to him. Jane set a fresh bourbon in front of him without asking. He muttered, "Same patterns. Same damn patterns we saw in '85. She wiped the bar, replied casually, "Weather cycles." Their code, a way of acknowledging each other without nomming what they knew. She never told him her past. He never asked. And yet the silence between them was the truest conversation either of them ever had. The bell above the door rang. Sheriff Mitchell walked in, snow crunching from his boots, eyes scanning automatically for exits. He had the bearing of a man who had once led rangers through jungles, the scar along his neck telling a story he would never share. He nodded at Jane. She slid him a club soda before he even asked. "Quiet week," she said. "Until today." His voice dropped low. "They're asking questions about you." Jane kept her face still, mixing Smartini with calm precision. "Men in suits," Mitchell continued. "Not locals, government, black Suburbans, DC plates, tactical positioning, 19s, lapel pins left side, agency, if I had to guess." His details were too sharp, more than a small-town sheriff. He knew what to look for. "They asked how long you've been here, where you came from, told them what everyone knows, which is nothing." Jane gave the smallest nod. "Thank you." He studied her, eyes narrowing. "If there's trouble coming, I want to know. This town matters." "They matter to me too," she said softly. It was the truth. She hadn't meant to care. But 7 years of pouring drinks, listening to Franklin's stories, helping carry wood through winters, it had seeped into her. For the first time since Caracas, she had built something like home. And now it was unraveling. The door opened again. 4 men walked in, shaking snow from their coats. They didn't belong. The room knew it instantly. Their eyes, their stances, their silent scanning, it screamed military, predators in civilian clothes. Jane recognized details no one else would. The leader's wrist bore the faint scars of restraints, his sleeve hiding the edge of a seal trident tattoo. The second man carried himself with the subtle tilt of a sniper. The third's fingertips bore the stains of explosives. The fourth moved like a point man, always ready to absorb the first hit. The leader's eyes landed on Jane. For a fraction of a second, recognition flared. She turned away, busying herself with bottles, but her heart had already dropped. Mark SEAL Commander, a name she knew by reputation only. Heroic missions, scars from captivity, a man who had survived things no human should. And he knew her. "Do I know you?" he asked later, voice quiet, probing. "You've got the wrong face," she answered, too flat, too quick. He didn't look convinced. He leaned closer, dropped 3 words that hit her like a blade. "Operation Kingfisher." Her hand froze on the glass, her blood iced. She forced herself to move, to walk away. But inside, her mind was roaring. Kingfisher, the mission before Caracas, the one that had uncovered the first threads of Prometheus, the one that had haunted her for 7 years. She had thought she buried it, thought she had buried Jane Harper. but ghosts don't stay hidden forever. What did he just say? Kingfisher. The word cut through her like a hidden blade. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 7 years. Not since the mountains, not since that snowstorm of secrets where her team first stumbled onto something the world was never supposed to know. Jane forced her hands to keep moving, polishing glasses, sliding beers across the bar, pretending the name meant nothing. Pretending was survival, but inside the muscles in her back coiled tight. Her mind replayed the mission she tried to bury: frozen ridges, Russian voices in the dark, a locked laboratory filled with American scientists, all executed with a bullet to the skull. And something worse, documents that spoke of Prometheus, of research so dangerous even the whispers had burned. And now this man was standing here in her sanctuary, dragging the past into the present. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she poured another drink for at the end of the bar. The old nurse lifted it with hands too steady for her age, eyes sharper than they looked. His gaze flicked from Jane to, as if reading the undercurrent no one else could sense. Didn't press, not yet, but his men shifted like restless wolves, their eyes scanning, calculating. The bar's atmosphere had changed. The locals felt it without understanding why, the way voices dimmed, the way laughter stalled mid-sentence. Even the loggers at the table stopped arguing. They felt danger without seeing its shape. Sheriff Mitchell noticed too. He leaned on the bar, his hand brushing close to his jacket where his backup weapon rested. His voice was calm, but his eyes locked on. "You boys just passing through." "Something like that," said. His tone was level, but the weight behind it wasn't casual. Jane stayed quiet, but her pulse thudded steady in her throat. Wasn't here by accident. He hadn't stumbled into Pine Ridge on a snowy night. Someone had sent him, or something had drawn him. And then it happened. Walter Hayes, the town drunk, pushed away from his stool, weaving unsteadily toward the restroom. He bumped shoulder first into the broadest of the seals. Beer sloshed. Silence cut the room. "Watch it, Jarhead," Hayes slurred. His voice carried just enough belligerence to shift the air from tense to dangerous. The seal rose half an inch, shoulders tightening, fists twitching, trained reflexes bristling under insult. Before anyone else could move, Jane was there. Fast, too fast for a bartender. She slid between them, her hand brushing the counter, sliding 2 beers toward the seal table. "On the house," she said. Her voice had changed, crisper, commanding. Not the tone of a barmaid, but of a leader used to giving orders in firefights. The seal froze, studied her face, his eyes narrowing. He knew that voice. "Do I know you?" he asked again. Jane's eyes met his for half a beat too long. Then she turned, dismissive, cold. "No, you don't." But didn't let go. His words came lower this time, only for her. "Jane Reed died in Caracas. I was at the memorial, full honors. The Secretary of the Navy himself spoke." Her breath caught, but only for herself. To the world she kept moving, wiping the counter with calm efficiency. "You've mistaken me," she said flatly. His gaze didn't waver. The Jane I knew had a scar, right shoulder blade, crescent-shaped. Cobalt 2014. Russian separatist with an RPG. You shoved me aside, took the blast. I carried you 2 miles to extraction. The sound of her glass setting down was almost too loud. Her body froze for half a second before she forced motion back into it. Leaned closer, voice urgent now, nearly a whisper. "They're coming for you. Whatever you found in Caracas, whatever you uncovered, Prometheus isn't dead. They're cleaning house. Everyone from your team is gone. Everyone but you and me." The words hit her harder than bullets. Her lungs tightened, breath shallow. She had suspected, of course. Years of silence from her team couldn't mean anything else. But to hear it confirmed, that Santos, Winters, all gone. Her hand trembled just once as she placed another glass on the shelf. The first crack in her armor in 7 years. "How did they find me?" she asked finally, voice low, stripped bare. "I don't know," said. "But I do know this: Prometheus is back, and if you stay here, you'll die." Before she could respond, shifted in his corner. His old radio crackled, a burst of static followed by clipped voices in Russian. His head snapped up, his eyes, sharp as they had been in 1983, locked on the frosted window. Set down her gin and tonic. She, too, was suddenly alert. And Jane felt it, that shift in air pressure, that silence before violence. Through the glass, headlights flashed, not random, tactical. Black SUVs surrounding the bar, boxing in every exit, engines idling low, steady, overlapping fields of fire. Her stomach sank, containment. "Move," she ordered in a whisper to Mitchell. He obeyed instantly, sliding his hand toward his weapon, scanning the crowd. The door opened. Cold air spilled in, followed by 4 men in tactical gear. Their rifles were low but ready, their movements precise, practiced, predatory. And behind them, stepping in with an expensive suit under a tactical vest, silver hair slicked back, smile sharp and soulless, came a man she recognized instantly. Director, Defense Intelligence Agency. The man who had whispered through the cracks of her nightmares for 7 years. "Ms. Reed," said smoothly, his voice warm but empty. "Or should I say, Commander Harper, reports of your death seem to have been greatly exaggerated." The bar was silent, the only sound the faint hum of radio. Jane felt the eyes of everyone she had served drinks to for 7 years, the mayor, the loggers, Hayes, Mitchell, all staring at her now, waiting to see who she really was. Her chest tightened, her cover was gone, the quiet years had ended. "National security matter," said, flashing credentials with one hand while the other made a subtle signal to his men. A predator's flick, an unspoken order, extraction. "Director," Jane said, her voice calm but steel-edged, "you killed my team in Caracas." It wasn't a question, it was a wound voiced aloud. Smile never reached his eyes. "Your team discovered something they shouldn't have, risks of the profession." "The Prometheus Protocol," she said, letting the name fall heavy into the room. The locals didn't know what it meant, but the old veterans did. Eyes tightened, jaw set, even Hayes blinked himself sober for a moment. "American intelligence selling bioweapons," Jane continued, her voice cutting like ice. "Not for security, for profit." Tilted his head, mock sympathy in his face. "Whatever you think you found died with Jane Harper. Officially, you died with them." Jane's hand moved beneath the bar. Everyone tensed, weapons twitching. Men shifted into ready stances. But instead of a pistol, Jane pulled up a small thumb drive. She held it between 2 fingers, steady, deliberate. "I mailed copies," she said, her voice calm, almost cold. 27 outlets, oversight committees, with a dead man's switch. If I don't reset the timer every week, it all goes public. 7 years I've kept it alive." For the first time, Smile faltered. His mask cracked. "You're bluffing." Her eyes were steady, unblinking. "I had 7 days to plan my death, Director. You think I didn't make contingencies?" The standoff thickened, every breath in the bar suspended. Men gripped their rifles. Seals leveled theirs. Mitchell's hand hovered near his sidearm, rose slowly from his corner, bourbon still in hand, his spine straightening with the weight of command he hadn't carried in decades. "You all should know who you're dealing with," said, his voice suddenly sharp, carrying authority that made the younger men blink. "Colonel Samuel, Special Activities Division, 1985 to 94. I trained both Commander Harper and Director back when oaths still meant something." The room shifted. Even men hesitated, thrown off balance. Jane's chest rose and fell once, steady, deliberate. She had hidden for 7 years, but hiding was over. The bartender was gone. The commander had returned. And everyone in that room could feel it. How long had she been pretending? 7 years of pouring drinks, remembering birthdays, nodding at fishing stories she didn't care about. 7 years of silence, of hiding behind the mask of ordinariness. And in one breath it was gone. Director's men held rifles steady, their eyes flicking between him and Jane. SEALs were a wall of tension, bodies angled for combat, fingers ready on triggers. Sheriff Mitchell stood alone near the counter, hand hovering by his holster, a man balanced between duty and survival. And Jane Harper, she stood now, not bartender, not ghost, commander. "You killed my team," she repeated. Her voice no longer asked, it accused, it judged. His cold smile widened. "They interfered in matters above their clearance. You, of all people, should understand operational security." Jane's eyes narrowed. "You mean treason?" His gaze sharpened, the warmth dropping from his tone. "Big words for a dead woman." The silence was shattered by the sharp metallic click of safety switching off. His men had raised their rifles in unison, barrels pointed squarely at operatives. His men mirrored the motion, sights aimed across the bar. For a heartbeat, the Whistling Pines was a powder keg. Every muscle, every breath, every twitch carried the weight of life and death. Then broke it. He spoke loud enough for every man in the room to hear. "Commander Harper was awarded the Navy Cross posthumously. We were told she died in Caracas, but if she's standing here alive, then we've been lied to." He dropped his weapon a fraction, just enough to make it a salute. His free hand rose crisp to his temple, a military gesture, sharp and deliberate. One by one, the SEALs followed, saluting her. Not the bartender, the commander. Jane's throat tightened, emotion pressing like a blade at her ribs. She had buried their respect along with her team's bodies, but now here it was again, alive, fierce, undeniable. "Stand down, Director," Jane said, her voice ringing with command. "This ends badly for everyone." His expression didn't crack, but his eyes betrayed calculation. He wasn't used to being challenged, not openly. Certainly not in some snowbound Montana bar by the ghost of a woman he thought buried. "This changes nothing," he said finally, his tone oily with control. "You're still a thief who stole classified intelligence. You'll vanish into a black site, and these men will be charged as accessories." Before Jane could answer, another voice cut the air. "You should all know something," said. He had set down his bourbon, his back was straight, his bearing crisp. "This isn't just a bar, and she isn't just a woman who stumbled into your little conspiracy. I trained her. I trained you too, back when you still knew what the oath meant." His mask cracked. For the first time, surprise flickered across his face. "Colonel, you're supposed to be dead." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Seems I've been keeping the same company as Jane. Dead men sometimes prefer the quiet." The room shifted again. His men faltered, authority wavered. Jane held her ground, thumb drive still raised between her fingers. "You underestimated us then. You're underestimating us now. Prometheus won't survive daylight." The air was electric, every second stretched thin. Then headlights sliced across the frosted windows, doors slammed, heavy boots approached. And the door burst open again. A team in black tactical gear stormed in, weapons raised. But these were men. Their uniforms bore FBI patches, their formation precise, their command sharp. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," a woman's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone down." Jane's eyes narrowed. The leader stepped forward, badge raised. Assistant Director Langley. Early 50s, composed, with the hardened bearing of someone who had lived years in the field before climbing into administration. "Director," she said crisply, "your presence is required in Washington immediately. Secretary Lynch has questions about unauthorized operations on U.S. soil." His jaw clenched. His men glanced at him, uncertain. Langley's team fanned into positions of control, weapons steady. Her words were clean, practiced, but Jane watched the subtle flicker of her hand, signals not standard to FBI protocol. Too smooth, too convenient. Her instincts burned. Langley wasn't what she appeared. Still, the shift was enough. Gave a tight nod, signaling his men. Reluctantly, they lowered their weapons. FBI agents swarmed, securing them with quick efficiency. "Commander Harper," Langley said, turning to Jane, "we need to talk." Jane's spine stiffened at the name. "Not Commander," she replied. "Not anymore." Langley's eyes held hers. "According to your file, you never stopped being one. You've been on deep cover assignment, rank and benefits accruing. Officially, you've been working for us all along." Jane kept her face still, but her stomach twisted. Another lie, another story layered over her life. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Langley said, "you testify. The Prometheus Protocol goes deeper than you've seen pieces of it. We need the rest." The words sounded like salvation, but Jane knew better. She saw the calculation in Langley's gaze, the same hollow hunger she'd seen in another predator wearing a badge. The bar emptied, leaving only Jane, Mitchell, and the SEALs. Silence lingered, heavy with revelation. Mitchell broke it first. His voice was quiet, steady. "7 years I've sat in this bar, Jane. 7 years, and I never guessed. Why here? Why Pine Ridge?" Her eyes softened just slightly. It was supposed to be temporary, a place to hide, but then weeks became years. Somewhere along the way, this place became home. He nodded, eyes heavy with the weight of a man who had seen too much. "And now?" Jane glanced around, the worn wood, the neon sign, the bottles lined like soldiers on parade. The place where she'd rebuilt herself from ruins. "Now I finish what started in Caracas." His voice was gravel. "It's not just Prometheus anymore, is it?" "No," Jane said, "it never was." Spoke then, her tone sharp, slicing the silence. "That FBI team wasn't standard bureau procedure. Langley's too smooth, too rehearsed. She knew exactly when to walk through that door. You think that's coincidence?" Jane felt the chill slide deeper into her chest. She hadn't trusted Langley's eyes. Now, who had stitched flesh under fire for decades, was voicing it aloud. Stepped forward, his presence calm but commanding. "Then what's the play, Commander? You tell us, we'll follow." Her eyes swept the room. Mitchell with his quiet loyalty, with his old war scars, with her hidden knowledge, and his men with their disciplined resolve. Her family had been slaughtered in Caracas, but here, by some cruel twist of fate, another one was forming around her. Jane Harper straightened. "We gather intel, we follow the trail, and we don't trust anyone outside this room." She raised her glass from behind the counter, filled it, and set it before them. Her voice was low, resolute, "To unfinished business." They drank in silence, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down. Tomorrow, the world would learn that Jane Harper had not died in Caracas. The bartender was gone. The ghost had stepped back into the light. Why did she agree to go with them? Jane asked herself that question over and over as the SUVs carved through the frozen Montana night. The headlights stretched across the highway like pale blades, cutting a path toward the unknown. Sat beside her, arms crossed, expression unreadable. His men rode in silence behind, their eyes sharp, weapons concealed but never far from reach. Langley's convoy led them, black Suburbans gliding in tight formation, radios crackling with coded chatter. On the surface, everything screamed official operation. But Jane's instincts kept scratching, whispering that something was wrong. 7 years of hiding had taught her to listen to that whisper. She watched the reflection of Langley in the mirror. Perfect posture, precise hand signals, crisp radio calls. Too crisp, too rehearsed, like someone reading lines they had practiced too many times. Leaned closer, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "You don't buy it." Her reply was just as soft, "Do you?" His jaw tightened, "No." The convoy snaked through mountain passes, snow swirling like ghosts in their headlights. Hours passed in tense silence. When they finally descended into a remote valley, Jane's unease deepened. The compound ahead wasn't standard FBI, too fortified. Guard towers, floodlights sweeping arcs across snow. A perimeter designed for war, not law enforcement. Langley stepped out first, coat snapping in the wind. She turned to Jane with a politician's smile. "Welcome to Raven Rock. Decommissioned NORAD site. We've repurposed it." Jane's stomach sank. Raven Rock. She knew the name. A Cold War relic. Continuity of government bunker. Black budget programs had bled through this place like rot through bone. She didn't move. Her boots felt anchored to the frozen ground. "This isn't bureau protocol," she said flatly. Langley's eyes held hers, calm, steady. "Commander, you've been underground long enough to know the rules change. We don't operate in daylight anymore. Not with what's coming." Jane studied her face, every muscle, every flicker of emotion. Langley's composure was flawless, too flawless. Muttered under his breath, "Feels like a trap." Jane didn't answer. She already knew it was. Inside, the compound was steel and shadow. Concrete tunnels hummed with fluorescent lights, echoing footsteps. Security doors sealed behind them one by one, swallowing escape routes in thick metal. Jane counted each lock, each turn. Old habits, survival habits. They were ushered into a briefing room. The walls were bare, except for a single projection screen. Langley gestured for them to sit. On the table, she placed a folder marked with a single word: Prometheus. Jane's pulse kicked. Langley's voice was calm, deliberate. "You're here because wasn't working alone. The Prometheus protocol isn't a rogue program. It's sanctioned." Her men shifted uneasily, leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Sanctioned by who?" Langley didn't blink. "Higher than you need to know. What matters is this: it's operational again. Weaponized pathogens. Delivery systems that make nuclear arsenals look like firecrackers. Was sloppy. You were. That's why you're still breathing." Jane's chest tightened. She forced her voice steady. "You're saying the U.S. government is developing bioweapons in violation of every treaty we've ever signed?" Langley's smile was thin, almost pitying. "Treaties are for peacetime. We don't live in peacetime." The room was silent, the air thick with betrayal. Jane's hands curled into fists against the steel table. Memories surged. The blood in Caracas, her team slaughtered for discovering this truth. And now, here it was, spoken aloud like it was nothing more than policy. Broke the silence, his voice hard. "Why bring us here? If you already have your program, why bother with ghosts like us?" Langley's gaze flicked to Jane. "Because she has the key. The last files from Caracas. The fragments we never recovered. Without them, Prometheus can't move to Phase 2. Jane's heart hammered. Phase 2. The words chilled her more than the snow outside. She had fragments, yes. Data salvaged in her escape. Enough to know the scope of Prometheus. Enough to terrify her into hiding. But she had never decrypted them fully. She didn't dare. Langley leaned forward, voice soft, persuasive. "You've been carrying it for 7 years. Imagine the weight you could shed. Hand it over. Let us finish what was started." The temptation hung in the air like a poison. 7 years of running. 7 years of isolation. All she had to do was give them the files and it would end. But at what cost? Her voice was low, firm. "No." Langley's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened. "You think you're protecting the world, but you're not. You're delaying inevitability. If the United States doesn't control Prometheus, someone else will. Russia, China, private actors. Do you want them holding the match?" Jane's chest burned. The logic was sharp, seductive, but underneath it lay rot. "You don't build cages to keep monsters out," Jane said quietly. "You build them to keep monsters in." For the first time, Langley's smile faltered. Just a crack, enough for Jane to know she'd struck the truth. The meeting ended abruptly. Langley's team escorted them to quarters deep within the compound. Concrete cells dressed up as guest rooms. Steel doors. No windows. Surveillance cameras tucked in corners. Paced as soon as the door sealed. His men stood like statues, eyes scanning, calculating. "This isn't bureau," muttered. "This is black ops." Jane sat on the edge of the bunk, elbows on her knees, head in her hands. For 7 years she had hidden. For 7 years she had avoided this moment. And now it had arrived. Mitchell's words echoed in her mind. Why here? Why Pine Ridge? Because she had wanted peace. Because she had wanted to forget, but peace was gone. Forgetting was impossible. She lifted her head. Her voice was quiet, but it carried steel. We're not staying. The SEALs snapped their eyes to her, froze mid-step. How? He asked. Jane's gaze shifted to the vent above the door, to the seams in the wall, to the angles of the cameras. Every inch of her brain had been trained for this, every instinct honed. They think I've been dormant for 7 years, she said, but I've been preparing, mapping contingencies. Every time I reset that dead man's switch, I updated the network. I know how to cut their grid. I know how to vanish. Again. His eyes narrowed. And what about Prometheus? Jane's voice dropped, almost a whisper. We don't just vanish this time, we burn it down. Silence filled the room, heavy, absolute, then gave a single nod. His men followed as soldiers follow when they've found their commander. For the first time since Caracas, Jane felt the weight of leadership settle back onto her shoulders. Heavy, terrifying, alive. She closed her eyes for a moment, hearing the echo of her team's voices, Santos, Winters, the dead who walked with her still. And she whispered to herself, so softly no one else could hear. Forgive me, I won't fail this time. The camera in the corner blinked red, watching, recording, waiting. But Jane Harper had already begun to plan her escape. The compound never slept. Even at 300, the hum of generators pressed against concrete walls, cameras swept corridors in precise rotations, and armed guards patrolled with the rhythm of men who knew mistakes meant death. Jane sat on the bunk, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Every click of boots, every flicker of light, every mechanical sigh of the air system etched itself into her mind. A map formed, a rhythm, a plan. She hadn't lost the skill. 7 years of silence hadn't dulled it. Her mind still worked like it had in Caracas, measuring, testing, calculating odds against time. Broke the quiet, you're not sleeping. Neither are you, she answered. He smirked faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. So, what's the move, Commander? Jane turned her gaze to him. The word commander still cut. It was both wound and salve. A reminder of everything she had lost and everything she might yet be again. We're getting out tonight, she said. His men stirred, eyes snapping toward her. Not one of them questioned it. They had already chosen her, even if no oath had been spoken. How? Asked. Jane rose slowly, walked to the wall and tapped the vent above the steel door. Air system. It ties into maintenance shafts. Those shafts connect to lower service tunnels. If I cut the cameras, we'll have 6 minutes before redundancy kicks in, enough to reach thee and move topside. Frowned and the cameras. Jane pulled a small object from her boot, a chip no bigger than a coin. She set it on the table. I built this years ago, buried code inside their own system when I first went aground, kept it alive with every dead man reset. It's been waiting. Tonight it goes active. Picked it up, studied it, then gave a low whistle. You've been planning for this a long time. Jane's jaw tightened. 7 years. Silence hung for a moment, heavy as stone, then gave a short nod. We're in. The hours crawled until lights dimmed for night cycle. Guards thinned. Cameras swept at predictable intervals. Jane's pulse slowed into the familiar rhythm of a mission. She slid the chip into the data port by the wall console. For 2 seconds, nothing. Then every camera in the wing blinked off. Go, she whispered. Men moved first, pulling vent covers, lifting themselves silently into the shafts. Jane followed, muscles straining as she pulled herself up, every movement echoing through memory, other missions, other shafts, other nights. The air inside was stale, metallic. They crawled in silence, following Jane's lead. She counted each turn, each grate. Her mental map unfolded like a blueprint. Finally, they dropped into a lower tunnel. Pipes hissed. Water dripped from corroded valves. Somewhere above, boots echoed faintly. They pressed forward, Jane in the lead, until the tunnel split. Left toward vehicle bays, right toward data servers. She froze. The mission was escape, but the servers, that was Prometheus. Data she had never decrypted. Files and Langley had killed her team for. Her breath caught. Her hands trembled just once. Saw it, Commander. She met his eyes, the conflict raging inside her. If we leave now, we live. But if we take what's in those servers, we die, he finished. Jane's chest burned, or we end it. The SEALs didn't flinch. They waited, silent, trusting her to decide. Her father's face flashed in her mind, his betrayal, his silence, her team's blood. Her voice came low, steady. We're going right. They moved. The server room was colder, a cavern of steel racks humming with hidden power. Blue light washed over their faces. The smell of ozone and frost bit the air. Jane crossed to the main console, slid her drive into the port. Code spilled across the screen, years of fragments finally aligning with the source. Files decrypted, names, numbers, project phases, delivery systems disguised as humanitarian aid, viral strains engineered for precision collapse of populations, contracts signed not just by intelligence but by corporations. And one name at the top, Prometheus Directorate. Jane's hands shook as she had all, not fear, rage. Footsteps echoed outside, heavy, approaching. Time up, hissed. Jane yanked the drive free. Move. They sprinted through tunnels, alarms beginning to howl. Lights strobed red. Metal doors slammed shut behind them, cutting paths one by one. Guards swarmed, rifles up, boots pounding steel. Men engaged with brutal efficiency, silence bursts, precise takedowns, but the numbers kept coming. Jane spotted a hatch above. Emergency access. She leapt, muscles screaming, fingers catching the edge. She pulled, forced it open, and hauled herself into the freezing night. Snow blasted across the ridge, searchlights swept, sirens wailed. One by one they climbed through, rolling into the snow. Bullets sparked against steel as guards poured fire from below. Jane shoved the drive into her jacket, breath ragged, eyes scanning. A path cut through the woods, narrow, steep. She pointed. Go. They sprinted, snow crunching under boots, lungs burning with icy fire. Behind them, Raven Rock roared awake, spotlights, vehicles, choppers lifting into the night. But Jane didn't look back, not yet. They crashed through the tree line, branches slashing, roots grabbing. Every step was a choice between speed and survival. Finally, the roar of engines faded. The forest swallowed them. They collapsed against a ridge, breaths heaving. Snow coated their shoulders, their faces, their weapons. For a moment, only silence. The kind of silence that comes when the world should have ended but hasn't yet. Turned to her, sweat and frost streaking his face. Tell me you got something worth this. Jane pulled the drive from her jacket, clenched tight in her hand. I got everything. Her voice broke slightly, not from exhaustion, from the weight of it. The others stared, eyes searching hers, waiting for the next command. Jane Harper looked at the drive, at the snow, at the men who had followed her into hell without hesitation. We're not running anymore, she said softly. We're going to burn them down. The words hung in the night like a vow. And deep inside, for the first time since Caracas, she felt something she hadn't dared touch in years. Hope. What does a fugitive do when she carries the world's darkest secret in her pocket? Jane Harper asked herself that as the snow settled on her shoulders. The stolen drive burned like a coal against her ribs. The Prometheus Directorate wasn't a rumor anymore. It was real, it was alive, and it was hunting. They moved through the woods for hours, silent but relentless. Led with compass and instinct, his men watching checking tracks. Jane followed just behind, her mind churning faster than her boots could carry her. Each branch that cracked beneath their weight sounded like betrayal. Each gust of wind carried echoes of choppers. When dawn came, pale and merciless, they found an abandoned ranger station deep in the forest. The roof sagged with snow, the windows were broken but the still worked. Inside, the cold bit less, though the walls groaned with age. Spread a map across the table. His voice was calm, steady. We're 40 miles from Pine Ridge. They'll be hunting every road, every trail. We need to decide, dig in or move. Jane didn't answer right away. She stared at the map, but her eyes were on the drive in her hand. The faces of her dead team flickered in her mind. This isn't just about survival. It's about finishing what they died for. Finally she spoke. We can't outrun this. We need allies. Raised an eyebrow. Who do you trust? Her silence was answer enough. Cleared his throat from the corner. He had followed them without question, his old war scars somehow lighter than the fresh ones on their faces. Trust is a luxury. What you need are people with something left to lose, people who will fight because surrender isn't an option. Jane studied him. The old colonel's eyes were still sharp, still dangerous. You have someone in mind. Nodded slowly. An old network, ghosts of the Cold War, men and women who lived too long in silence. They'll come if I call. Frowned, and if they do. His mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Then we die quicker. The room fell quiet. Decisions were cliffs, and they were already stepping off the edge. Jane clenched the drive. Make the call. Hours later, the radio crackled. Shortwave, coded, voices layered in static, spoke in phrases that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't lived in shadows. Winter is early this year. The river's frozen at both ends. The cabin still stands. The reply came in clipped tones. 3 days, midnight, the crossroad at Red Hollow. Jane memorized every word. 3 days, Red Hollow, allies or another trap. That night she couldn't sleep. The others dozed in shifts, rifles across their chests, boots still on. Jane sat by the stove, staring at the embers. 7 years she had hidden. Now in the space of days she was back in the fight, and it terrified her. Not the guns, not the blood, the weight, the responsibility of command. She whispered into the dark to no one but the ghosts, I won't fail you again. The next morning they moved before dawn. The forest was endless, trees black against the snow. Jane set the pace, relentless but measured. Every step was a choice, every silence a prayer. By the second night they reached Red Hollow, an abandoned truck stop, long since gutted by time. The neon sign still clung to one corner, letters missing, buzzing faintly in the cold. They waited. Midnight came like a knife. Headlights cut the dark. A single vehicle rolled in, engine low, windows tinted. The doors opened and 3 figures stepped out. Older, the kind of people who carried history in their bones. One of them, a woman with iron-gray hair and a limp, studied Jane with sharp eyes. You're supposed to be dead. Jane met her gaze without flinching. A lot of us are. The woman's lips twitched. Not a smile, not yet, but something close. Introductions were brief. Names weren't given, only call signs. Falcon, Bishop, Wraith. They were relics people, but their stances were sharp, their movements efficient. Professionals who had never really retired. In the diner's gutted shell, they shared what they knew. Prometheus wasn't just intelligence. It was corporations, private contractors, military brass. A hydra with heads in every shadow. We can't cut one head off, Falcon said. Her voice was gravel. We burned the body. Jane laid the drive on the table. This is the body. They leaned in, eyes narrowing. The air thickened. But before another word could be spoken, the night shattered. Gunfire ripped through the windows. Glass exploded inward. Muzzle flashes lit the dark. The roar of engines swelled as black SUVs swarmed the hollow. Ambush barked, already returning fire. The room erupted. Rifles barked. Bullets chewed wood, screamed off metal. Jane dove behind the counter, dragging the drive with her. Prometheus had found them. Wraith went down first, a round tearing through his shoulder. Bishop pulled him back, firing with one hand, blood streaking the floor. Falcon laid down bursts, calm and surgical, her limp forgotten in the fury. Men moved like ghosts, firing in controlled pairs, cutting angles, covering each other. Lifted an old revolver, the kind no one carried anymore, and put 2 rounds into headlights before ducking back into cover. Jane's breath came sharp, controlled. She wasn't hiding, she was calculating. Every window, every angle, every enemy line. She wasn't the bartender anymore. She rose, pistol steady, and fired. 3 shots, 2 men fell. The air reeked of gunpowder and blood. But they were outnumbered. For every SUV they disabled, another poured men into the hollow. Prometheus wasn't here to capture. They were here to erase. Jane's voice cut through the chaos. Fall back, rear exit. They moved as one, covering, firing, dragging the wounded. The diner groaned under the onslaught, splinters flying, neon shattering. In the alley behind, snow crunched under their boots as they sprinted into the trees. Engines roared behind them. Headlights carved through the dark. Jane ran until her lungs burned, until her legs threatened collapse. But she didn't stop. Not while the drive was still in her hand. Not while others had chosen to follow her. Finally, the forest swallowed them again. Silence returned, broken only by ragged breathing. They collapsed against fallen logs, blood steaming in the cold. Wraith groaned, pale but alive. Bishop pressed her coat against his wound, face set in grim determination. Scan the woods, weapon ready, breath hard. They're not stopping. They'll hunt us until we're ash. Jane clutched the drive to her chest. Her voice was hoarse but steady. Then we don't let them hunt, we strike first. The others turned to her, their faces shadowed but alive with something more than fear. Resolve. Jane looked at them. The SEALs, the veterans, the broken, the people who had no reason to follow her except trust. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. And in that frozen forest, surrounded by people who should have walked away but hadn't, Jane Harper made her choice. We take the fight to Prometheus, she said. No more running, no more hiding, we end it. The words carried like a vow, low but unshakable. In the distance, engines still growled. The hunt wasn't over, but something had shifted. The hunted had turned. Jane Harper wasn't a bartender anymore. She wasn't just a survivor. She was commander again. And this time, she wasn't going to fail. How do you kill something with 1,000 faces? That question stalked Jane Harper through every mile of the frozen forest. Prometheus wasn't just a program. It wasn't just or Langley or the shadows in Raven Rock. It was a hydra, each head smiling in a different boardroom, whispering in a different government office, bleeding money and power into every dark corner of the world. And yet, for the first time, Jane wasn't afraid of its size. She was afraid of failing those who now followed her. They regrouped in an abandoned mine shaft, the walls slick with frost, the air heavy with silence. A lantern flickered, casting shadows across faces battered by the red hollow ambush. Wraith lay pale but alive, Bishop tending him with steady hands. Falcon leaned against the wall, her limp more pronounced now, but her eyes fierce as ever. Unrolled a stolen map across a crate. We need a target, something big enough to hurt them, small enough to hit and survive. Jane studied the lines, the coordinates, the red marks scrawled in Falcon's old handwriting. Falcon pointed with a finger. Here, a logistics hub, Idaho. It looks like a warehouse, but satellites show traffic that doesn't match. Night convoys, unmarked choppers, always at odd hours. Men leaned closer. One muttered, could be a storage site. Falcon shook her head. It's more than that, I've seen the patterns before. Cold War smuggling. This isn't storage, it's transfer. Jane's jaw tightened. Transfer meant movement. Prometheus wasn't sitting still. They were preparing something. "How many?" asked. Falcon's lips twisted. "Enough to kill us twice." The room fell quiet. Jane pressed her palms against the table, feeling the rough wood bite her skin. "Then we don't meet them head-on. We cut the arteries. No bullets unless we must. We take their data. We expose them." His brow furrowed. "Data isn't sexy, Commander. People don't rally around a thumb drive." Jane met his gaze. "They rally when they know the truth. That's what scares Prometheus more than bullets, exposure." For a moment, silence again, then gave a short nod. His men followed without hesitation. The plan formed over hours. Infiltration at night. 2 teams, one to breach, one to cover, would coordinate remotely, his radio crackling old signals into new battles. Falcon would guide them with her encyclopedic memory of smuggling patterns. Bishop would tend the wounded. And Jane would lead. As night fell, they moved. Blackened trucks across frozen back roads, headlights killed, engines low. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a block of steel against the white. They slipped into position. His team covered the perimeter, rifles silent but steady. Jane led her team toward the loading bay, shadows moving through shadows. A guard stepped into their path. Jane's pistol whispered once. He fell without sound. Her chest tightened, not from guilt, but from the weight of necessity. Each death stacked on the ledger she carried, the one she knew she'd never balance. Inside, the warehouse buzzed with quiet activity. Forklifts moved crates marked as medical aid. Jane's eyes narrowed. She knew the shape of those crates. She had seen them in Caracas, in broken labs, in blood-stained corridors. Viral transport units. Her breath caught. They pressed deeper, sliding between rows of stacked steel. His voice crackled softly in her ear. 3 guards ahead, clockwise patrol. Jane signaled. Falcon's suppressed rifle hissed twice. Bishop, of all people, threw a wrench with surgeon's precision, distracting the third long enough for Jane to silence him with her blade. Her team froze at the center of the warehouse. A command post stood ahead, monitors, terminals, files. "This is it," Jane whispered. They moved fast, drives slotted. Files, lines of code raced across screens. Jane's hands shook as she saw the scope, distribution networks, names of politicians, accounts funneling billions. Prometheus wasn't a program, it was an empire. Then the alarm screamed. Red lights bathed the warehouse. Metal doors slammed. From above, catwalks filled with armed men. Dozens too many. Ambush growled. Gunfire erupted, tearing through crates, splintering steel. Jane ducked behind cover, bullets screaming overhead. Falcon returned fire, Bishop dragging Wraith behind a stack, his men laying down suppressive bursts. But Prometheus wasn't here to scare them. They were here to annihilate them. Jane's mind raced. They couldn't win, not here, not head-on. She spotted a crate marked with the same serial code she remembered from Caracas. Inside, pathogen canisters. If stray rounds hit, the entire warehouse would become a graveyard. Her chest clenched. This wasn't a firefight, it was a trap. "Cease fire," Jane roared. Her voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Stop shooting now." For a heartbeat, her men obeyed, froze, eyes darting to her. The enemy hesitated, confused. Jane stood, hands raised, pistol lowered. Her voice carried steady, hard. "You fire one more round, you kill us all. You contaminate your own people, your own town. That's what you want." The catwalk soldiers faltered. Uncertainty rippled through them. They weren't briefed. They didn't know what was in those crates. But one man did. He stepped from the shadows above, flanked by armored guards, his smile sharp as glass. "Well done, Commander," he said, his voice dripping with triumph. "You just walked into the heart of Prometheus, and now you'll die here exactly where you belong." Jane's heart pounded. The files were still copying. Seconds felt like years. His voice murmured in her ear, "Tell me you've got a plan." Her hand tightened on the pistol. Her eyes never left. "Yes," she whispered, "but it's going to hurt." She raised her weapon, not at his men, but at the crate beside her. "The canisters." Gasps rippled, smile faltered. Jane's voice cut the air like a blade. "You want Prometheus to live, then you need me alive. One stray bullet, one wrong move, and your empire leaks into the wind." The silence was absolute. The files completed their transfer. Jane pulled the drive, tucking it deep into her vest. For the first time in years, she saw fear in his eyes. "Stand down," she commanded. And against all odds, he did. How long could a standoff last when death itself sat waiting inside a crate? Jane Harper's pistol hovered steady, its muzzle an inch from Prometheus's own weaponized canisters. One shot, one slip, and the entire warehouse would become an unmarked grave. Above her, smile wavered, but his eyes were still venom. He tried to cloak it in authority. "You won't do it. You've lived too long in the shadows, clinging to survival. You don't have the will to end everything." Jane's chest burned. He wasn't entirely wrong. For years she had hidden, choosing silence over fire, choosing to live while her team lay buried. But tonight was different. Tonight she wasn't hiding. "I don't need to end everything," she said, her voice cold. "Just you." Her gaze swept the catwalks, locking eyes with the soldiers. "You think you're here protecting your country, but you're pawns. You pull that trigger, you don't just kill us. You kill yourselves, your families, your homes. That's the truth they didn't tell you." Doubt rippled through the men above. Muzzles lowered. One by one, hesitation spread like contagion. Saw it too late. Jane's voice sharpened. "Stand down." The silence was deafening. Then slowly rifles began to dip. The weight shifted. His mask cracked, anger twisting his face. He hissed into his comm, barking orders, but no one moved. His whisper filled her ear. "Files are secure, we need an exit." Jane nodded. "On my mark." She fired, not at the canisters but at the floodlight above. The glass burst, plunging the warehouse into shadow. "Move." Her team erupted. Smoke grenades hissed. Shadows danced. Bullets sparked, but confusion reigned. Soldiers fired wild, unwilling to risk the canisters. The men cut a path, Falcon laying precise bursts, Bishop dragging Wraith through the chaos. Jane ran last, pistol covering, her breath ragged. She saw in the strobe of gunfire, screaming orders no one followed. His empire was crumbling before his eyes. They burst into the night, cold air searing lungs, snow crunching under boots. Engines roared to life, trucks they had stashed earlier. They piled in, slammed doors, and tore into the darkness. Behind them the warehouse loomed, sirens wailing, lights flickering like a dying beast. Inside the truck, silence pressed heavy. Jane's hands clenched the drive, her knuckles white. Glanced at her. "We got what we came for." She shook her head. "No, not yet." The drive held Prometheus's empire, names, accounts, networks. But information meant nothing if it stayed buried. Exposure was their weapon. 3 days later, they sat in a farmhouse gutted long ago, now reborn as a war room. Maps littered the table. Radios buzzed. The old veterans spoke in clipped tones, planning, weaving old methods into new wars. Jane sat apart, staring at the drive. The weight of it pressed into her palm, heavier than any weapon she'd carried. Lowered himself into the chair across from her. His voice was quiet. "You're carrying more than data. You're carrying ghosts." She didn't answer. He leaned forward, eyes steady. "You think if you destroy Prometheus, you'll balance the scales. You won't. Nothing balances the dead, but you can give their deaths meaning. That's all any of us ever do." Jane swallowed hard, throat tight. "What if I fail again?" His gaze didn't waver. "Then you fail fighting. That's more than most can say." Her chest ached. She closed her eyes, hearing the voices of her fallen team, not accusing, not haunting, just waiting. When she opened them, her voice was steady. "We go public." Falcon frowned. "You'll be hunted, Every agency, every corporation with a piece of Prometheus, none of them will let this live. Jane's jaw tightened. Then we make it too loud to silence. The plan was simple, reckless, inevitable. Leak everything at once. 27 outlets global. No single point of failure. And Langley would try to spin it, bury it, call it disinformation. But the truth would spread like fire, and fire couldn't be unseen. The night they sent it, the farmhouse buzzed with tension. Jane pressed the final key, transmitting the files across encrypted channels. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the radios lit up, chaos in Washington, confusion in NATO, corporations scrambling, names hitting the airwaves. Prometheus wasn't myth anymore. It was exposed. But exposure carried a price. Minutes after the leak, drones hummed overhead. Engines thundered. Prometheus had unleashed its fury. Positions barked. The farmhouse erupted in violence. Missiles screamed. Walls collapsed. Bullets tore through wood and flesh. Falcon fell, her rifle clattering from her hands. Bishop dragged her even as blood spread across her chest. Jane fought with the ferocity of a cornered soul. Each shot was measured, deliberate. Her mind detached even as her body bled. Through the smoke she saw, not in person but on the screens of the drones above. His voice filled the comms, taunting. "You think you've won. Exposure means nothing. We'll bury the story. We'll bury you." Jane raised her pistol, firing at the drone camera, shattering his image. Her voice rose above the chaos. "You can bury me, but you can't bury the truth." Explosions ripped the farmhouse apart. Fire consumed wood, stone, flesh. When the smoke cleared, dawn broke cold and merciless. The farmhouse was rubble, bodies scattered. Men stood bloodied but alive, coughed, his revolver still in hand. Bishop wept quietly over Falcon, her limp body finally still. Jane stood among them, her face streaked with ash and blood. The drive was gone, consumed in the fire, but the files had already spread. The world had them now. She looked at the sky, pale light breaking through smoke. For the first time in years, she let herself breathe without the weight of silence. Stepped beside her. His voice was low, reverent. "It's done." Jane shook her head. "No, it's never done, but it's enough." They stood in silence, watching the horizon. The war wasn't over. Prometheus would mutate, adapt, survive. But the mask was gone. The world had seen its face. And sometimes that was enough. Jane's voice softened, almost a whisper. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The wind carried her words into the dawn. And Jane Harper, ghost, bartender, commander, finally felt the weight lift.